she had always been quiet. In a world full of loud voices, confident gestures, and endless chatter, she often felt invisible. People walked past her as if she were part of the background, and at school, at social gatherings, and even in music class, she rarely got the attention that some seemed to take for granted. She carried herself gently, moved softly, and spoke only when necessary. Her eyes, however, held a depth that many did not notice. They could see everything, every laugh, every whisper, every judgment, but she kept it inside. She had learned that the world often did not reward quiet strength, only noise. Music had been her refuge for as long as she could remember. The piano in her room was more than just an instrument. It was a friend, a confidant, and a place where she could express what words could never carry. She spent countless hours there, practicing late into the night, her fingers gliding over the keys with a precision that came from dedication, discipline, and deep passion. No one had seen her in those moments. They never saw the hours she spent perfecting every note, the frustration when something didn't sound right, or the tears that sometimes fell when the music matched her emotions too perfectly. To the world, she was quiet and unremarkable. But at the piano, she was alive in a way she could not explain. The day she walked into the music hall where the event was being held, she felt the familiar nervous flutter in her stomach. The room was filled with people who had already formed opinions about her. From the moment she stepped through the doors, she could feel the weight of stares and whispered words. Some people looked at her and smirked. Others exchanged glances that said without words, "What is she even doing here?" She tried to ignore it, focused on the familiar feel of her music sheet in her hands, the smell of the polished wood of the piano waiting for her. Her heart beat faster, but not because she was afraid of the performance. She was afraid of being laughed at before she even had a chance to speak through her music. It started subtly. A group of students, confident and loud, made a joke as she walked past. Their voices carried, sharp and cutting. "Do you think she even knows how to play?" one said, laughing under her breath. Another chimed in with a chuckle that carried just enough to reach her ears. "Maybe she will just make funny sounds." She clenched her hands tightly, gripping her music sheets as if they could protect her. She forced herself not to react. She had learned long ago that reacting to ridicule often gave the mockers the power they wanted. Instead, she focused on the piano, the keys, the notes she had been perfecting for months. She told herself that once she began to play, the music would speak louder than words. People continued to whisper and chuckle, their doubts filling the room like a thick fog. She could feel their eyes, judging every step she took toward the piano. Every movement seemed to draw their attention. When she finally reached the bench, she paused for a brief moment, sitting down, adjusting the bench height, and positioning herself as she had done countless times in private. She looked down at the keys, remembering the countless nights she had spent alone in her room, perfecting the timing, the flow, the emotion behind every note. Those nights were quiet, filled with a soft glow from her desk lamp, her world confined to the music and her determination. No one else knew about those nights. No one knew the effort it had taken to reach this moment. And yet, here she was, exposed to the world, knowing that many would doubt her even before she played a single note. The audience was restless. Some were talking among themselves, their voices rising above the subtle hum of the room. Some exchanged sideways glances, their smirks still in place, confident that the show would be more amusing than impressive. She could hear a faint chuckle, the softest hint of a laugh. But it was enough to remind her how different this moment was from her private practice. She felt the familiar knot in her stomach tighten, the pressure of expectation pressing down on her shoulders. But she also felt a spark deep inside, a stubborn flame that refused to be extinguished. She had worked too hard, practiced too long, and loved the piano too deeply to let ridicule stop her now. This was her moment, and she would take it as she placed her fingers lightly on the keys. She closed her eyes for a fraction of a second. She remembered the countless times she had played alone, imagining an audience that could understand her, feel her emotions, and appreciate the story she wanted to tell through music. She remembered the evenings when the rain tapped gently against her window, the piano notes filling the quiet room, and she felt a sense of calm wash over her. This calmness, she realized, could be her armor against the doubts and laughter around her. She inhaled slowly, letting the air fill her lungs, and then exhaled, feeling a sense of purpose settle in her chest. She was ready, even if the room wasn't ready for her. The first note was soft, almost hesitant, yet deliberate. It resonated through the room, a single sound that demanded attention. Some heads turned, curiosity replacing amusement for a brief moment. She played another note, and then another, the melody beginning to form as her confidence grew with every keystroke. She felt the music flowing through her fingers, a rhythm that was both familiar and exhilarating. The laughter and whispers had not stopped completely, but they seemed farther away now, drowned out by the growing power of her performance. She could feel the music taking over, guiding her, telling her story in a language that required no words. The audience began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. They were not used to someone so quiet commanding attention with such skill. Some looked surprised, others skeptical, but all were listening now. The notes flowed like water, rising and falling, weaving a story of resilience and quiet strength. She played with precision, but also with emotion, letting every note carry the weight of her experiences. Every mistake she had ever made in private practice, every late night spent correcting her errors, every tear shed in frustration, all contributed to the music she now played. It was as if the piano had absorbed all her struggles and now released them into the room with a power that could not be ignored. Despite the growing hush, she felt the eyes on her, measuring her every movement. She did not look at them. She did not need their approval. She only needed the music to speak, to convey what she had never been able to say in words. Her fingers danced across the keys, each movement precise, yet natural, each note intentional, yet filled with feeling. The room seemed to shrink around her, the walls fading away, leaving only her and the piano. A world where she was no longer invisible. Time seemed to stretch as she played. She lost herself in the melody, forgetting the audience, forgetting the whispers, forgetting the laughter that had followed her into the room. This was her sanctuary, and for the first time in a long while, she felt truly seen not by their eyes, but by the music itself. The notes told her story of being underestimated, ignored, and ridiculed, but also of perseverance, determination, and the quiet power of dedication. Every key she pressed was a statement, a reminder that skill and passion often lie beneath the surface, invisible to those who judge too quickly. The more she played, the more the room began to change. She could feel it subtly at first, shift in energy, a quiet tension replacing the previous laughter. People leaned forward, unconsciously drawn to the sound, their attention captured despite themselves. She played on, feeling the music reach into every corner of the hall, touching hearts in ways she had only imagined in her solitary practices. She was no longer just a quiet girl at the edge of the room. She was a storyteller, a conduit for emotion. The piano was her voice. For her, this moment was more than just a performance. It was validation of the years of work, the sacrifices, and the quiet struggles that no one had witnessed. She had often wondered if it was all worth it, if anyone would ever notice, if her efforts would ever be recognized. But as the music filled the room, and she felt the subtle changes in the audience, she realized that recognition was not the goal. The goal was expression, and through that expression, she had begun to command respect in the only way that truly mattered. The keys beneath her fingers became an extension of her being, each note a reflection of her journey, and each chord a statement that she would not be underestimated. The room remained quiet, but the energy had shifted completely. She could feel it vibrating through the floorboards, echoing off the walls, seeping into every listener's consciousness. What had started as an ordinary day, filled with potential mockery and doubt, had transformed into a moment of revelation. She did not stop to notice faces. She did not pause to gauge reactions. She only played, letting the music carry her story, letting it reveal the truth that had been hidden for so long. Her past of being overlooked, the subtle ridicule, and the whispered doubts all melted into the melody, giving it depth and authenticity that no words could convey. By the time she finished the first section of her piece, a silence hung in the air. It was not empty silence, but one filled with awe, curiosity, and anticipation. The audience could no longer dismiss her. She had made them listen, She had made them feel, and even though the performance had only just begun, the first impression was undeniable. Beneath her quiet exterior lay a talent that was both rare and profound. She had turned the initial mockery into a moment of respect. Simply by being true to herself and her art, she leaned back slightly, taking a brief pause to catch her breath. Her hands hovered above the keys, ready for the next sequence. She could feel the change in the room, subtle but powerful. The whispers had ceased. The smirks had faded. In their place was a growing attentiveness, a quiet tension that spoke of curiosity and amazement. For the first time in her life, she felt that her music was not just an outlet for her own emotions, but a force that could command attention, inspire reflection, and demand respect. She realized that moments like these were rare, and that the courage it took to step forward despite the air in the room had changed since she first sat at the piano. The laughter and whispers that had followed her like shadows were no longer as sharp, though they had not disappeared entirely. Instead, a tense curiosity had settled over the audience. People were no longer simply amused. They were trying to understand what they were hearing. She could feel their eyes on her, measuring, analyzing, guessing, but this time, the energy did not make her smaller, it made her more aware, more alert. She knew that the next moments would determine how the rest of the performance would unfold, and she was ready to rise to the challenge. She glanced briefly at her music sheet, her fingers hovering just above the keys. The first notes she had played were only an introduction, a gentle whisper that hinted at what was to come. The room had started to quiet down, but she knew that many were still skeptical. She could see it in the way some people leaned back in their chairs, arms crossed, as if preparing to critique every mistake she might make. There were also those who were leaning forward, their eyes wide, clearly caught off guard by what they had just heard. She took a deep breath, letting her mind clear of any thoughts about the audience. She had to focus entirely on the music, on the story she wanted to tell, not on the judgments that hovered just above the surface. The next sequence of notes was more complex, demanding precision and emotion simultaneously. She began with a soft, slow rhythm, letting the melody flow like a gentle river. Her fingers moved gracefully, each key pressed with purpose. The hall, once filled with murmurs, grew quieter. Some people held their breath, drawn in by the unexpected depth of her performance. She could feel her confidence growing, fueled not by pride, but by the awareness that her music was reaching them, touching them in ways words never could. The feeling was intoxicating, a mixture of relief, excitement, determination. As she continued, she could feel the subtle shift in the room. Skeptical faces were softening, curiosity replacing doubt. Some of the people who had laughed now had wide eyes, their attention fully captured. It was fascinating to her how quickly perceptions could change when faced with undeniable talent. She did not play for them. She played for herself and for the music. But the effect on the audience was immediate and undeniable. Their reactions, though unspoken, filled the room with a quiet energy that lifted the performance even higher. She remembered all the times she had been underestimated, the moments when her skills were dismissed, the evenings spent practicing alone while others celebrated and laughed around her. Those memories, once painful, now served as fuel. She poured them into the keys, letting her experiences shape every note. The melody became richer, more expressive. There was sorrow, there was hope, and there was a quiet defiance that threaded through every movement of her hands. The music became her voice, speaking truths that had been silenced for far too long. The room responded. She could sense it even without looking. Chairs shifted as people leaned in, some unconsciously trying to catch every nuance of the performance. She could feel the energy vibrating in the air, an invisible connection forming between her and those who had doubted her. It was not the approval she had sought for years, but something more subtle and profound, the acknowledgement that her talent was real, undeniable, and moving. It gave her a renewed sense of purpose, and her playing reflected it. Each note grew stronger, more confident, yet never losing the delicate emotion that made it meaningful. A few people exchanged glances, silently communicating surprise and admiration. She did not need their validation, but she noticed the change in atmosphere. The mockery that had greeted her entrance was replaced by attention, and attention had the power to change everything. She continued, letting her hands move fluidly across the keys, expressing more than just technical skill. She expressed resilience, determination, and the quiet triumph of someone who had been underestimated her whole life. The hall seemed to hold its breath, and for the first time she felt truly seen. Even without a single word spoken, the music began to build. She added layers of complexity, her fingers dancing with precision, moving from soft, gentle notes to louder, more passionate sequences. Her emotions flowed into the performance naturally, each chord telling a story of struggle and perseverance. She remembered the long nights of practice, the moments of doubt when she wondered if anyone would ever recognize her abilities. And she let all of that translate into the melody. It was raw, authentic, and full of life. The audience could not help but be drawn into the narrative unfolding through the music. She noticed a few people leaning closer to the piano, their skepticism replaced by genuine fascination. Some of the earlier mockers were now silent, their eyes fixed on her fingers as they moved effortlessly across the keys. It was a subtle but powerful transformation, one that she could feel in the room. The energy shifted from judgment to engagement, from amusement to respect. She had never felt such a tangible connection with an audience before. It was as if the music had created a bridge between her world and theirs, allowing them to see for the first time the depth of her talent and the truth of her dedication. The middle section of her piece required complete concentration. It was intricate, demanding both technical skill and emotional depth. She focused entirely on the piano, blocking out any distractions or lingering doubts. The rhythm was complex, the tempo challenging, yet she moved with ease. Guided by hours of practice and an intimate understanding of the music, her hands flew across the keys with confidence, each note precise, each transition smooth. The audience could sense the mastery behind every movement, even if they did not understand the technical details. They felt the music, and that was enough. As she progressed, she noticed the subtle signs of transformation in the room. People were no longer shifting in their seats nervously. The whispers had stopped. Even the most skeptical faces were now calm, captivated by the performance. She could sense that the audience was becoming part of the music, not just passive listeners, but active participants in the story she was telling. It was a rare and powerful feeling, one that reinforced her belief in the universality of music, the way it could touch hearts, change perceptions, and create a shared experience without a single word being spoken. The more she played, the more she lost herself in the music. It was no longer about proving herself to anyone or overcoming mockery. It was about expression, about allowing her emotions, experiences, and talent to flow freely through the keys. She remembered the years of solitude, the quiet moments of doubt and determination, and she let all of that guide her performance. Each chord resonated with authenticity. Each melody carried the weight of her journey. The audience could feel it, even if they could not explain it. They were witnessing something real, something deeply human. By the time she reached the climax of this section, the room was completely transformed. The initial mockery had vanished, replaced by awe and respect. People were leaning forward, their eyes wide, their attention unwavering. The energy in the hall was electric, but it was a quiet, focused energy. Not the boisterous laughter that had greeted her arrival. She felt a sense of satisfaction, not from external validation, but from knowing that she had reached them through her music. She had turned doubt into curiosity, skepticism into engagement, and mockery into admiration all without a single word. Her fingers moved with precision and grace, transitioning seamlessly between delicate passages and powerful chords. The music was dynamic, full of emotion and complexity, yet never losing its clarity or purpose. She was telling her story, and the audience was listening. Every note was deliberate, every pause intentional. She allowed herself to feel the music fully, to let it guide her, and in doing so, she elevated the performance to a level that was both personal and universally compelling. The piano had become an extension of herself, a tool through which she could communicate what words alone could not convey. As the section drew to a close, she allowed a soft, lingering note to resonate through the hall. It was a moment of pause, a chance for the audience to absorb what they had just experienced. She could feel their anticipation, their curiosity, and their growing admiration. It was clear that the performance had shifted the perception of her presence in the room. She was no longer just a quiet girl who had been laughed at. She was a musician, a storyteller, and a force that demanded attention. The room held its breath, ready for what would come next. She straightened on the bench, taking a brief moment to center herself. Her fingers rested lightly on the keys, ready for the next section. She felt a quiet pride, not an arrogance, but in the knowledge that she had overcome the initial doubts and had begun to reveal the depth of her talent. The journey was far from over, but she had taken the first critical steps. She was no longer defined by the whispers and laughter that had followed her. She was defined by her skill, her dedication, and her ability to convey emotion through her music. The audience, sensing the pause, waited in silence. Some exchanged glances, their expressions reflecting surprise, admiration, and even a hint of humility. The girl at the piano had begun to rewrite their expectations, showing that true talent often lies beneath a quiet exterior. She took a deep breath, feeling the energy in the room, and allowed herself to prepare for the next movement. She knew that the challenge ahead would be even greater, that the piece demanded more complexity and emotional depth, but she also knew that she was ready. She had faced doubt, ridicule, and underestimation before, and she had survived. Now, she was ready to take the next step. To continue her story through the language she knew best, music. She had passed the first moments of tension and doubt, and now the music had taken full control. Her fingers glided across the keys with fluidity that seemed almost effortless. Though each note was the result of countless hours of practice and patience, the melody she played was no longer simply a sequence of notes. It had become a story, a voice for her emotions, and a testament to her perseverance. Every chord carried a subtle weight, every pause was a breath of reflection, and the rhythm seemed to pulse with life itself. She was not thinking about the audience anymore. She was thinking about the story she wanted to tell, about the truth that had been inside her for so long. Waiting for this moment to emerge, the audience had been drawn in. Captivated by the unexpected depth of her playing, their initial skepticism had given way to curiosity, and now a quiet tension filled the room. People leaned forward, their eyes fixed on her hands as they moved over the keys. Some held their breath, as if afraid to break the fragile connection forming between the music and themselves. It was a delicate transformation, subtle but powerful. The girl who had been mocked and underestimated was commanding the room with her talent, and the effect was undeniable. She felt the energy of the audience not as pressure, but as a silent acknowledgement of her presence, her skill, and the truth that her music conveyed. As she played the next part of her piece, the complexity increased. The notes became faster, the rhythm more intricate, and the emotional depth more pronounced. She had practiced these passages countless times. Yet in this moment, they felt alive, responding to her every thought and feeling. Her hands moved with precision and grace, each key struck with intention, each chord resonating with power. The music was no longer just sound. It was a living, breathing entity, reflecting her journey, her struggles, and her quiet triumph over adversity. She had learned long ago that the piano could express what words could not, and now, in front of a room that had doubted her, she was proving that truth. The transformation in the audience was gradual, but undeniable. The smirks and whispered jokes had vanished completely. Some faces showed astonishment, others a reflective admiration. People who had expected to be entertained by her mistakes were instead witnessing skill and emotion intertwined, so perfectly that it left them momentarily speechless. The quiet energy in the room had shifted from skepticism to engagement. She could feel it in the way the air seemed to vibrate, in the subtle movements of the listeners, and in the collective stillness that hung over the hall. They were being moved by something they could not ignore, something real and profound. She remembered the moments that had led her here, the times she had been laughed at, the nights she had spent alone, practicing until her fingers ached, the feelings of invisibility that had weighed on her for years. All of those experiences had shaped her, had strengthened her, and had now become the foundation of her performance. The music was not just notes on a page. It was a reflection of her life, her resilience, and her determination to be heard. Each measure was a testament to the patience and dedication that had brought her to this stage. And each phrase carried the emotional depth that only personal experience could create. The piece demanded more than technical skill. It required emotional investment. She allowed herself to feel every note fully, to let the music guide her emotions, and to express them through her hands. There were moments of gentle softness, where the melody whispered and caressed the listeners' hearts. There were moments of powerful intensity, where the chords surged and filled the room with energy. She balanced these dynamics with care, knowing that the ebb and flow of emotion was what made the music resonate with truth. Her audience could feel it, even if they could not articulate why. And that connection made every effort she had made to get to this moment worthwhile. As the piece continued, she began to explore more intricate patterns, intertwining different melodies and harmonies that challenged her concentration and skill. Her fingers moved with astonishing speed and accuracy, yet there was no tension in her posture or movement. It was as if the piano itself had become an extension of her body, responding to her thoughts and emotions with perfect synchronization. Each note carried meaning, each chord progression told a story, and the room seemed to exist solely within the music. The audience was no longer merely watching. They were experiencing it alongside her. Caught in the current of sound and emotion that she had created, the audience's response was subtle but powerful. People shifted in their seats, some leaning closer, some closing their eyes to absorb every nuance. A few whispered comments of admiration reached her ears, but she did not let them distract her. She was focused entirely on the music, letting it carry her forward, letting it reveal the depths of her skill and the story she had kept hidden for so long. The subtle change in atmosphere was enough to sustain her, to give her confidence and validation without a word being spoken. She could feel the impact she was having, not through applause or praise, but through the attentive silence of those around her. Her emotions intertwined with the music, allowing her to play with a level of authenticity that could not be faked. There was a vulnerability in the performance, an openness that invited the audience to connect on a personal level. The room seemed to breathe with her, rising and falling with the tempo. Responding to the crescendos and decrescendos of her expression, she was telling a story that was both deeply personal and universally understood. The journey from doubt to recognition, from fear to confidence, was embedded in every measure. And the audience could feel it, even if they could not fully articulate what they were experiencing. She could see subtle reactions from individuals, a raised eyebrow of surprise, a soft smile of admiration, a small nod of acknowledgement. These gestures, though quiet, were powerful indicators that her music was reaching them. The skepticism that had greeted her at the door was fading, replaced by an attentive respect that she had rarely experienced. She allowed herself a brief moment to acknowledge this internally, but she did not let it distract her from the task at hand. The piece required focus, precision, and emotional engagement, and she was determined to give it everything she had. The music flowed effortlessly, moving from delicate passages to bold, powerful chords. She explored the full range of the piano, utilizing both hands independently, creating harmonies and rhythms that were complex yet natural. Every movement, every note, was deliberate, reflecting the years of study and practice that had led her to this point. She was fully immersed in the performance, lost in the language of the piano, yet deeply aware of the subtle energy of the room. She could feel the audience's engagement, their shifting emotions, and their growing admiration. It was a rare and exhilarating experience, one that validated every sacrifice she had made for her art. The middle section of the piece was particularly challenging, demanding both technical mastery and emotional depth. She navigated it with skill and grace, her fingers moving rapidly and accurately, yet with an effortless quality that made the complex passages seem natural. She allowed herself to experience the emotions behind the notes fully, letting them guide her interpretation. There was a sense of freedom in this, a liberation from the constraints of doubt and judgment. The music became a conduit for her emotions, and the audience could sense the honesty and intensity in every note. The hall was completely silent now, save for the sound of the piano and the subtle reactions of the listeners. The initial mockery had been replaced by a profound engagement, People who had come expecting a minor entertainment were now witnessing a performance of skill, emotion, and depth that few could deny. The transformation in the room was remarkable. The energy had shifted from doubt and amusement to awe and quiet respect. The girl at the piano was no longer just a performer. She was a storyteller, a conduit for emotion, and a force that could command attention through her art. As the piece progressed, she felt a growing connection with the audience. It was not a connection built on words or gestures, but on the shared experience of music. She could sense their emotions, their engagement, and their understanding, and it fueled her performance further. Each note was infused with intention, each chord a reflection of her journey, and each passage a testament to her dedication and perseverance. She played not for approval, not for applause, but for the music itself, and in doing so, she reached the hearts of those who listened. The final section of this part of the performance required both technical brilliance and emotional intensity. She approached it with a calm focus, her fingers moving with precision and elegance. The music swelled and receded, carrying the audience through a journey of feeling and expression. She allowed herself to experience the emotions fully, letting them guide her interpretation and inform every movement. The room seemed to exist solely within the music, and she felt a sense of unity with the audience, a rare and profound connection that transcended words. By the time she reached the final notes of this section, the room was completely transformed. The initial mockery and doubt had vanished, replaced by admiration, respect, and engagement. The audience was silent, absorbing every final note, and she allowed the last chord to resonate fully before letting her hands rest lightly on the keys. She took a deep breath, feeling the energy in the room, and allowed herself a brief moment of satisfaction. She had overcome the doubt, the judgment, and the underestimation. She had revealed a part of herself that few had seen, and the impact on the audience was undeniable. As she prepared to continue, she felt a quiet confidence growing within her. The first steps had been taken, and the transformation in the room was evident. She was no longer just the quiet girl who had been mocked. She was a musician, a storyteller, and a force that could command attention and respect through her art. The journey was far from complete, but this path moment she entered the next section of her piece. A sense of purpose settled over her. She had already begun to change the energy of the room, and now it was time to fully take command of the space with her music. The notes were more daring, the rhythms more intricate, and the emotional depth more intense. She played with a sense of freedom that had been absent in earlier moments. Every key she pressed was deliberate, yet fluid. Each sound a reflection of years of dedication, practice, and the quiet moments of struggle that had gone unnoticed by almost everyone else in her life. This was no longer just a performance. It was a declaration of her presence, her skill, and her voice. The audience was completely absorbed. The room that had once echoed with whispers and laughter was now enveloped in a focused silence. The transition from doubt to awe had been gradual but unmistakable. People leaned forward, some unconsciously, as if trying to catch every nuance, every subtle shift in tone, and every delicate movement of her fingers. Even those who had doubted her most were now captivated. Realizing that they had underestimated someone whose talent was as profound as it was unassuming, she did not notice the change consciously. She felt it. The energy of the room resonating with the music she created. She moved through the keys with precision, her hands flying over the instrument with both grace and authority. The complexity of the music demanded complete concentration, yet she was fully in control. Every note was intentional, every pause measured, and every chord resonated with emotion. She had reached a point where the music and her expression were inseparable, a seamless extension of her inner world. She felt an exhilaration that came not from the recognition of others, but from the purity of expressing herself fully, without compromise, through the language of music. As she continued, the emotional intensity of the piece grew. She allowed herself to channel every feeling she had held back over the years, moments of frustration, nights of loneliness, times of self-doubt, and the quiet pride of skill honed in secret. These emotions shaped the music in a way that was both subtle and profound, giving it a depth that was impossible to ignore. The audience could sense this honesty, the vulnerability and strength woven together in the performance, even if they could not articulate it. The music had become a bridge, connecting her inner world to theirs. A shared experience that transcended words. The complexity of the composition demanded careful navigation. She moved effortlessly through intricate passages, each finger working independently, yet the overall sound remained harmonious, cohesive, and deeply expressive. She allowed herself to feel the music, to immerse herself fully in the ebb and flow of rhythm and melody, and to let the audience experience every rise and fall along with her. There were moments of quiet introspection, delicate phrases that seemed to hover in the air, and there were surges of power, dynamic sequences that filled the room with sound and emotion. Every aspect of her performance was carefully balanced, combining technical mastery with heartfelt expression. The audience was no longer just observing. They were living the music alongside her. The room was alive with the energy of shared emotion, a subtle but powerful connection that transformed the space. People were leaning closer, closing their eyes, allowing the music to envelop them. The transformation was remarkable. A group that had once doubted and mocked her was now captivated and deeply engaged. They were feeling what she felt, understanding what she had carried silently for years, and witnessing the beauty and power of someone who had been underestimated for far too long. Her focus was absolute. She did not play for applause, recognition, or validation. She played for the music itself, for the story it allowed her to tell, and for the truth it allowed her to express. Each note was a declaration, each chord a reflection of resilience, determination, and quiet strength. The piece had become a narrative, not just of technical skill, but of a journey, from doubt and mockery to recognition and awe. The audience could sense this journey, experiencing it in real time, without words, without explanation. The transformation was evident in the subtle expressions on their faces, in the way they leaned forward. In the way the room seemed to hold its breath. She felt the weight of those moments she had spent unseen, her talent unnoticed, her efforts unacknowledged. Those memories fueled her playing, adding depth, intensity, and emotion that were impossible to replicate artificially. The piano had become her voice, her instrument for truth, her means of showing the world a part of herself that had long remained hidden. Every measure, every phrase, and every chord resonated with the authenticity of lived experience, drawing the audience into a world they could feel but not fully articulate. The complexity of the music increased further, demanding even more from her fingers, her mind, and her emotions. Yet she played with grace, precision, and a sense of ease that belied the difficulty of the composition. She allowed the music to guide her, to shape the tempo, to dictate the intensity, to express the layers of meaning within the piece. She moved seamlessly from soft, delicate passages that invited introspection to powerful, resonant sequences that demanded attention and respect. The audience was caught in the tide of her music, carried along by the flow and swept away by its beauty and power. The emotional resonance of the performance was growing. She felt it in the subtle reactions of the listeners, the way they leaned closer, closed their eyes, or let out soft, involuntary breaths in response to particularly moving passages. The room was no longer merely a space for observation. It had become a shared emotional landscape, a place where the music and the listeners coexisted, each shaping the experience of the other. She was not conscious of these reactions in the moment, yet she felt them, the energy of the audience blending with her own, creating a sense of unity and shared understanding. The middle section of this part of the piece required absolute precision and full emotional engagement. She navigated it with skill and confidence, moving her fingers rapidly and accurately across the keys, yet ensuring that every note carried weight, emotion, and purpose. There were sequences of rapid, complex passages that demanded technical mastery, and she executed them flawlessly, her focus unwavering. The music flowed naturally, each movement an extension of her own inner rhythm and feeling, each phrase a testament to the dedication and perseverance that had brought her to this moment. As she progressed, the dynamics of the performance became more pronounced. She explored contrasts between soft and loud, delicate and forceful, subtle and dramatic. These contrasts added depth and intensity to the music, making it compelling and emotionally engaging. She allowed herself to fully inhabit each moment, experiencing the emotions behind the notes and translating them into sound. The audience responded not with applause or commentary, but with an attentive silence that spoke volumes. They were moved, captivated, and deeply engaged. Feeling the music in ways that went beyond simple observation, the audience's transformation was complete. The initial mockery and doubt that had followed her entry were completely gone, replaced by a sense of respect, admiration, and engagement. People who had expected an unremarkable performance were now witnessing skill, emotional depth, and authenticity of expression. Some whispered quietly to one another, others simply watched in awe, but all were absorbed in the music. The girl at the piano had completely changed the narrative, turning skepticism into wonder, judgment into admiration, and mockery into a shared experience of beauty and truth. She felt a quiet pride, not from external validation, but from the knowledge that she had conveyed something profound and authentic. The music had become a conduit for her story, her emotions, and her experiences. It was not just a performance. It was an extension of her identity, a way to communicate the truth of her journey and the depth of her talent. Every note, every chord, and every passage was a testament to her dedication, her resilience, and her ability to express what words could never capture. She had taken the audience on a journey, and the impact was visible in the silence, the attentive posture, and the emotional engagement of the listeners. The final passages of this section demanded both technical mastery and emotional vulnerability. She approached them with calm confidence, allowing the music to guide her. Her fingers moved with precision and grace, creating harmonies and melodies that were both intricate and emotionally resonant. She allowed herself to feel the full range of emotions embedded in the piece, expressing them through the keys and into the space of the room. The audience felt it too, their reactions subtle, yet profound, their attention unwavering, their engagement complete, as she played the final notes of this part of the piece. She allowed them to resonate fully, lingering in the air. The silence that followed was not empty, but filled with a sense of anticipation, awe, and quiet admiration. The audience had been transformed, just as she had been transformed through the act of performing. She had faced the initial doubt, ridicule, and underestimation, and through the power of her music, she had rewritten the narrative of the room. She was no longer the quiet girl who had been made fun of. She was a musician, a storyteller, a force of presence and talent that could not be ignored. The moment hung in the air, heavy with emotion and meaning. She allowed herself a brief pause, taking a deep breath and feeling the energy in the room. The journey was far from over, but she had reached a pivotal point. She had captured the audience's attention, shifted their perceptions, and demonstrated the depth of her skill and emotion. The music had carried her beyond the realm of doubt and mockery, to a space of recognition, respect, and shared experience. She felt a quiet confidence, knowing that the next section would continue to build on this foundation and bring the performance to its fullest expression. She leaned slightly forward, her fingers poised above the keys, ready to continue. The room remained,